Sometimes the hardest part of apologizing to your teenager is not knowing what to say. But a lot of times, that's not actually the hardest part. The hardest part is this: you know you need to repair. You definitely know that you blew it. You know that your tone was off, or your reaction was way too big for the moment, or that your words just landed harder than you meant them to. And your teenager just doesn't want to hear it. They shrug, they give you the typical, I'm fine. Or they just keep walking, put their AirPods in, that sort of thing. And suddenly, the apology that you knew how to make with a younger kid feels a whole lot more complicated. Hi, I'm Dan Hayden, and this is the Positive Legacy Podcast for Christian Fathers. The title of today's episode is When Your Teenager Doesn't Want to Hear Your Apology. Now, before I go any further, I want to make something pretty clear. This episode is directly connected to episode 28, which was titled When You Blow It: Repair, Confession, and Starting Again. But it is definitely not the same episode. You see, in that episode, I was really focused on the core structure of repair itself. How do you come back after a blow up? How do you name what happened, own your repair, and reconnect? That episode was about repair as a foundational fathering skill. This week's episode is different. This one is about what changes when the child you're trying to repair is older. And thankfully, they're growing more independent, but they're also more guarded and maybe not all that interested in making your apology feel better. Because teenagers change the terrain. You're not always repairing with a little kid who still just wants a hug 5 minutes later. You may be repairing with someone who is hurt and defensive all at the same time. You may be repairing with someone who wants space or someone who doesn't trust quick emotional cleanup. Someone who might hear your apology and just think, yeah, okay, Dad, I get it. I'm still mad. And all of that matters. So what I want to do here is talk about what repair looks like when your teenager doesn't meet you halfway. And trust me, they're not always going to meet you halfway, because the goal in that moment is not instant closeness. The goal in that moment is credibility. The goal is truth. The goal is showing your kid that you can own yourself without demanding that they immediately make you feel okay again. That is a very different kind of repair. And honestly, it's a far more mature one. Let me start with this. One of the things that makes repair with teenagers hard is that they can just see more. They understand more. They can see your inconsistencies more clearly. They can hear your tone more sharply. They can remember patterns much longer. And I'll tell you, they can also detect pretty quickly when your apology is actually still about you. That's important because sometimes as dads, when we go to apologize, what we are really hoping for is relief. We want the tension gone. We want the house and in our relationships with their kids in that moment. We just want them to feel normal again. We want them to say it's okay. We want to know we are not terrible dads. And if we're not careful, we can turn an apology into a quiet request for emotional absolution. And that's a lot to put on a teenager. Your teenager should not have to comfort you because you finally told the truth about yourself. That's one of the big differences in this episode. Repair with teenagers often means learning how to apologize cleanly without requiring a fast emotional resolution. You're telling the truth because it's true, not because you need a quick soft landing. And that's a powerful shift. I think a lot of dads know how to say, I'm sorry. What they don't always know is how to say it without over explaining or without defending or without trying to force the relationship to bounce back on their timeline. So let's talk about that. If you blow it with your teenager, your first job is still the same as it was in episode 28. Your first job is to own your part. But the second job, your second job here, it's a little different now. Your second job is to let your teenager have their own pace in receiving it. And that can be hard, especially if you're sincere about it all. And again, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are pretty sincere. Because maybe you really are sorry. Maybe you've thought about it and you've prayed about it and you've worked up the courage. Because even with our kids, it takes courage to go back and say, "Hey, kid, I'm sorry. That was on me." And then what happens? They just barely look at you, or they're just like, "Okay," or you get the dreaded whatever, or "It's fine," and you know full well it is not fun. This is where our saboteurs will try to jump in. Your judge might say, "See, they're disrespectful. Why are you bothering with this?" Your victim saboteur may say, "Great, I'm trying here, and it doesn't even matter." Your controller saboteur, and as dads, boy, we all have them. Your controller saboteur might just want to push harder. "No, look, we're going to talk about this right now." But if you do that, the repair stops being repair and starts becoming pressure. That's not what we want. What we want is something steadier, something more like, "Hey, I need to own something from earlier. My tone with you is not okay. You didn't deserve that. That one's on me, and I apologize." And then just stop. Not, and here's what was going on for me for 5 minutes straight. Don't start droning on and with stuff like, "But you also need to understand," and things like, Look, aren't you going to say anything?" You know, we just want truth, clean and simple. This is one of the things that I work on with dads in my coaching all the time, because many men, have never really learned how to apologize without attaching a hook to it. The hook, it might be explanation, it could be self-justification, right? Trust me, that happens. The hook might be a demand for a quick reconciliation, or hoping your kid just reassures you. A clean apology has no hook. It sounds like this: "I was too harsh. I shut you down. I embarrassed you. I took away your opportunity to experience the joy in that moment." And then, depending on the moment, it may also sound like, "Look, you don't have to talk about it right now. I just wanted to own my part. I just wanted to own that. I'm here when you're ready." And of course, it sounds like, "I love you." That kind of repair does something really important. It gives your kid room. It gives your kid room to breathe. It gives your kid room to stay honest and trust that your apology, it's not a trap. And that matters because teenagers are often highly sensitive to emotional manipulation, even subtle emotional manipulation. If your apology feels like, "Now you need to smile and tell me we're all good," they're going to feel that. If your apology feels like, "I'm finally being honest and I can handle it if you're still upset," they'll feel that too. One of those builds pressure, the other builds trust. Now, I want to say something here that may help a lot. Just because your teenager does not respond warmly does not mean the repair failed. That's huge. A lot of dads misread the moment. They think, "Well, I apologized. I got nothing back, so I guess that didn't matter." No, not at all. It may have mattered a lot. But your kid, they still may be mad. That's justifiable. They may still be hurt. They may not know what to do with your apology yet. That is not rejection. That's just realism. You know, our teenagers, they're old enough to know that one apology does not replace a pattern. They are also old enough to test whether your words are just momentary emotion or part of a genuine change. So listen, don't panic if the response is just flat. The win is not immediate warmth. This is long-term work you're doing here. The win here is that you told the truth and you owned your part and stayed relationally present without forcing that emotional outcome. That builds credibility. And credibility it matters a lot more than quick emotional relief. I think this is especially important when the thing you blew was tied to one of the big pressure points we've been talking about in this series. Maybe it's freedom or school or friends or something spiritual. You reacted too strongly. You came in way too hard. You lectured when you should have listened. You used fear as your fuel. Now you're trying to come back. The temptation is to make the apology really long because you want them to fully understand you. But teenagers often do not need a 5-minute explanation. They need about 15 seconds of truth. Something like, hey, earlier when we were talking about your grade, I made the conversation heavier than it needed to be. My anxiety came out as pressure, and that wasn't fair to you. So I'm sorry. I want to apologize. Or it could sound like, when you were telling me about your friends, I got reactive and controlling instead of curious. That shuts you down, and I want to apologize. It's short, it's clear, it's honest. No courtroom defense, no sermon, no emotional chaser, just ownership. That kind of clarity is something a lot of dads need practice with. And honestly, if you're hearing this and you're thinking, yeah, either I say too little or I say way too much, that is exactly the kind of thing I help dads sharpen in with my coaching. Not because you're broken, but because repair is a skill. And most of us, we were just never trained in it. So let's talk about timing, because timing matters more with teenagers than I think a lot of parents realize. There are moments when the right thing to do is to apologize quickly. But there are also moments when your teenager is just too flooded, too angry, or too shut down to receive anything well. And trying to force the repair right then actually makes things worse. Sometimes the wiser move may be to just give it a little space and let the room cool, let the car ride end, and then come back later quietly and own your part. This isn't avoidance, it's discernment. You're not waiting to see if it all blows over. You're choosing a better moment for truth. And that matters because teens often need enough emotional room to not feel cornered. The more cornered they feel, the less likely they are to hear you. So if your kid doesn't want to talk right now, just respect that. You can still repair without forcing a full conversation. You may say something like, hey, look, you don't have to get into it right now. But I just need to tell you that I know I was wrong how I handled that thing earlier. That's strong, that's calming, and that's mature. And then maybe later, if the door opens, you can talk more. This is also where patience comes in, because repair with a teenager is not always at one moment. Sometimes it's an apology plus a changed pattern over the next week or two. Your kid may believe your apology more when they see your next response come out differently. Look, and that's fair. In fact, that's healthy. So don't just ask, did I apologize? Also ask, am I becoming safer to talk to? That's a much deeper question. If your kid is guarded, sometimes the path back is not more words. It's cleaner words and better follow through. That may mean you got to lower your volume next time, or you ask more and lecture less next time. You don't bring up the same issue in a shaming way the next day. It may mean that you show them that your apology came from real awareness, not just your own guilt. That's how trust starts growing again. I also want to say something about humility here. One of the strongest things you can do with a teenager is admit that your apology may not instantly fix what you damaged. That sounds like, hey, I know that, I know that may not make this feel better right away. I know I may have hurt more than I realized. And I'm not asking you to be over this thing immediately. I just need to own what was mine. That kind of humility is powerful. It tells your teenager, I am not using this apology to manage your feelings or to justify my own. And that is rare. It's also deeply respectful of your kid and your relationship with them. So if I were to boil this down, I'd say repair with the teenager really has 4 marks. It's honest, it's brief, it doesn't force closeness, and it also stays available. Honest, brief, no forcing, still available. That's a pretty good grid. So, what do you do this week? Think back to a recent moment with your teenager that still feels a little off. Maybe the issue is technically over, but the air is still kind of weird. Maybe you know you came in too hot. Maybe you shut them down or you embarrassed them. Maybe your own anxiety and insecurities took over. Look, if that moment comes to mind quickly, don't ignore it. Take a few minutes and ask yourself, what exactly do I need to own? Can I say it in 2 or 3 sentences without defending myself? Am I prepared to let them respond however they want to respond? And remember, that last question matters, because if you're only going back to apologize if they receive it well, you're not really going back to repair. You're going back there to try to control the ending. Instead, go back with openness and curiosity. Tell the truth, leave the room, stay steady. And if you're listening to this and realizing, well, that's exactly what I do. I either avoid the apology or I overdo it because I need the relationship to feel better fast. I want to invite you to take the next step. This is one of those places where dads can really grow with some support. Remember, transformation is not going to happen overnight. This is a long-term process, but it's also, you also can't go through a transformation like this alone. And insight also is not enough. So inside my Positive Legacy Academy, we work on this kind of real life repair all the time. How to own your note without collapsing into shame, how to apologize without over-explaining, and how to stay connected even with a guarded teenager. How to rebuild credibility when your kid doesn't meet you halfway right away. And how to keep becoming the kind of father whose honesty makes trust possible. If that sounds like what you need, I'd love to invite you to a complimentary, no strings attached coaching call. On that call, we can talk about where repair feels hard with your teenagers right now, what tends to get in the way for you, and how you want to show up differently. And whether coaching with me and a group of other Christian dads would help you move forward with more steadfast and clarity. You can grab a time on my calendar through the link in my show notes. You do not need your teenager to make your apology easy for it to matter. As you think about your own home this week, where do you need to tell the truth cleanly, give your teen room, and stay available without forcing the outcome? As always, and until next time, stay rooted in grace, stay steady in mind and spirit, and keep building your positive legacy one intentional moment at a time. Talk to you again next week.